It's about one of the most influential artists of the Renaissance, one of the most influential artists of all time, still admired today, and we've heard some of his words already. Okay, so first, art teacher here, little art history. The Renaissance was born in Italy in about the 1400s, early 1400s, late 1300s. And as many of you know, it followed a very dark time in Europe. A time after the fall of the Roman Empire, where Europe had basically fallen into chaos, political systems fallen apart, people were hungry, people died of diseases, people died of famine, and basically the only institution that survived during this time that had any stability to it was the Roman Catholic Church. The church, the cathedrals, when the peasants, and you and I, I'm sorry, we all would have been peasants, we would have come in on Sunday, and on Sunday we would hear beautiful music, an organ playing, a piano, well not the piano, an organ playing, instruments. We would smell good smells, the incense burning, and we would hear stories in the lessons. You probably couldn't understand it because they were mostly in Latin. However, we could look around at the windows and we would see the stories of the gospel and the Bible in the stories, because you and I, we couldn't read back then. Now, art of this time, because it was so chaotic and insecure, was almost always religious art. But somewhere around in the 1400s, things began to look up for humans. There was a great rebirth, a renaissance. It was a time of great exploration of nature, physics, anatomy, philosophy, science, and the study of humans, humanity itself became important. There was less disease, more stable forms of government, an increase in food production, and with an increase of food came an increase in population. There also came at this time more specialization in professions. It's kind of the rise of professions. People, because they had more food, didn't have to spend their whole time just trying to raise food. They could become silversmiths, they could become cloth makers, they could become straw basket weavers, and they would take that knowledge and they would pass it down to their sons and their daughters, who passed it to their sons and daughters, and there was an increase of wealth for the average person. Today we would have said, well, it was a little bit like, they called them guilds, but it was a little bit like our unions back in the industrialization of the US and the world. Okay, these people have money. They still give money to put beautiful pictures in the churches, but they also want to put beautiful pictures and tapestries in their own homes. And they want beautiful pictures of their own loved ones. And now we come to the Renaissance artist that I'm going to talk about. Somebody who exploded onto the scene during the Renaissance, and you already know who it is, Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo from the town of Vinci. Born to an unmarried maid, but who was so intelligent, so precocious, so interested in everything around him. He becomes a poet, he's a musician, He's a philosopher. He's an inventor. And for our purposes, he's also one of the greatest artists. And I'm sure you probably know one of his greatest art pieces, probably the most famous painting in all the world. Now, when I would say that phrase in my classes, there was always some kid who would say, is it that Mona lady? And these were eighth graders, so I was pretty impressed that they knew that. Especially way out here in the sticks. Okay. And then they would say, well, she doesn't have eyebrows, she's not very pretty, blah, blah, blah. Why is she so famous, Mrs. P? And I would say, well, first of all, she's not a saint. She's not a religious person. She's an everyday person. Her husband wanted a picture of his beautiful young wife. And so he commissions Leonardo. Another innovation, she was actually sitting in front of Leonardo when he was sketching her and painting her. Back in the Middle Ages, people didn't have time to actually look to see how Katie's face is shaped. They just did it out of their imagination. And that's why you have some really strange things in medieval or Dark Ages art. But anyway, he's looking at the real person, and he's drawing and painting the real person. Another innovation. She is showing us what she's thinking. Now, there's some interpretations where, and I would ask my students, okay, let's vote. Who do you think thinks that smile is a smile of sadness? Who do you think maybe thinks it's a smile of happiness? Okay, and that would be interesting too, because we all come to art with our own interpretations of things based on what we ourselves have experienced in life. But the point is, this is a real lady. She's actually thinking something, and she's showing it on her face. There are thoughts in her head, and that's what Leonardo is showing. Another innovation is she's one of the first oil paintings in history. And for those of you who are artists, oil paints don't dry very quickly. You put it on the canvas, or in this case, 3 pieces of birch wood, and the oil doesn't dry, sometimes for weeks. And that means you can come back and you can change a little bit here. You can change a little bit there. You can rework parts that you didn't like so much. Well, apparently Leonardo, well, first of all, he never gave this painting to Lisa's husband. He kept it with him his entire life. And scientists, it's in the Louvre now, and scientists have found that he used 33 layers over this painting. And remember, it takes a long time for a painting to dry. So he had to wait between each of those layers. Okay, well, on to the art lesson for today, drawing. Okay, another innovation of the Renaissance artists, not just Da Vinci, but all the other greats of the Renaissance also. Here we have a horizon line. That's your viewpoint, right? That's where our eye level is. And on that point, is where we are standing looking. Okay. our eyes. The Renaissance artists noticed that when you see lines, straight lines, they don't look straight when you're actually looking at them. And you know this because every time you've driven to Des Moines or Kansas City, if you see a big straight stretch or even a long hallway, you're going to see that the lines of the road, even though it's really long down here, 20, 30 feet, it looks as if it converges to that vanishing point on the horizon. And artists in the Renaissance started painting and drawing what they saw. And for our purposes, I'll show you what that means. If you're drawing a building, so here's the wall of a building, the back wall. Now I'll get my ruler up. Okay. If you want to show that room a little longer correctly, you're going to use that vanishing point to properly construct the illusion of 3 dimensions, height, width, but depth. The illusion of 3 dimensions on a flat surface. Let's finish it up and see what. Okay. Now if I square that off, try to make this a little darker so you can see that better. Now I'm going to remove the helper lines. And you've got the inside of a room or a box. Architecture, the way it really looks, something the medieval artists didn't understand. Because the Renaissance artists were looking at the way things really look. They're trying to be realistic. Okay, so that brings us to Leonardo's great painting. The Last Supper. He's called to Milan for the Duke of Milan, and he says, actually he's called to make some weaponry for the Duke of Milan, to devise some weaponry. But along the way, the Duke of Milan says, hey, I want you to decorate my mausoleum. And that falls to the wayside, but he says, okay, well, actually, it's going to be on a wall, and it's going to be eventually where the friars of the Dominican church are going to have their dinner every day when they come in from traveling out to preaching, basically, out to the outer villages. And Leonardo says, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paint the Last Supper. And this is a big painting. From here to here wide, and from this landing to that ceiling. It's 15 feet by 28 feet. Actually, a little tiny, a few inches more. Okay, so that's pretty interesting right then and there. And when I saw it last, it was covered with scaffolding because Leonardo's greatest painting, besides the Mona Lisa, was also his greatest failure because it was on a wall and he should have painted it with water paints to go with the water plaster. That was the common way to do it. But Leonardo never did anything the way anybody else ever did it. He said, I want to combine tempera, water-based, egg-based, with oil paints, and I'm going to put it on dry plaster. Okay, well, big failure because it started to chip within about 50 years of its completion. And that's why when Jack and I last saw it, it was mostly covered in scaffolding because people were desperately trying to fix it. Scientists and art people, art restorers were up there taking fleck by fleck, removing old glue, because lots of people tried over the many centuries to save it, with microscopes, cleaning it, and putting it back in its exact place. Okay, so why is this painting so monumental, besides its size? Well, well, it's basically because Jesus is here in the center, and it's a scene of him and his apostles, disciples at that point, his friends. And Leonardo has chosen to show the psychological moment. The moment when Jesus, sitting there with his friends, says, one of you is going to betray me. And each of the disciples it shows that moment, the psychological moment where each of the disciples goes, what? 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 And if you could put the first slide up, that's the room where it is. You can see how huge the room is, and you can see how the Last Supper is an extension of that room, that hallway. It's the hallway because it turns out it's going to be the room where the friars, the Dominican friars, eat. Second slide, please. Okay, so for those who are up close, you can see each of the apostles is showing their shock and confusion. It's a second in time of utter chaos. What has he just said? And he's showing us, Leonardo is, by their body pose, what they're thinking, what they're going through. Okay. Next slide, real quick. Okay. Couple of small details. Right here, the dark-haired man who's kind of leaning away from Jesus. His hand is clutching the bag of silver. Obviously Judas. Behind him, Peter. Over here, Apostle John. Next slide, please. On the other side, other apostles. Is it me, Lord? Am I the one? And Thomas, finger raised, always the one with the objection. Wait a minute, Jesus. What did you just say? Okay, next slide. And you notice it's a religious painting in a religious monastery, but where are the halos? And Leonardo's telling us something. These people are human beings. Even Jesus is a human being. God, human. God and human. God and human. And I say, well, there's no halo, but wait a minute. Let's see if I can do this right. Back to our perspective, our distance perspective, and our leading lines. Every sight line leads to one person in that painting. He doesn't need a halo. He's the center of it. He's what it's all about. And if you look behind to see what that light that is around his head, that window shows the world. Leonardo's telling us that. Jesus Christ, is the light of the world. Every time the friars looked up from their dinner, they saw the message there. They saw their challenge as a follower of Jesus. And they were reminded every mealtime of what they were supposed to be about. That painting is a sermon on a wall. It seems to me that Leonardo is presenting us with the same challenge that he did to his disciples at that moment in time. We aren't separated from the disciples. We're right there. He's left a space at the table for us on this side. Will we be the disciples of Jesus? Will we share our bread? Will we offer healing? Will we ask the children to come? Will we try to do his work? I often come to the communion table mindful of Christ's admonition to examine myself. And when I do, sometimes I only see the failings of my heart, my mind, my inactions, and my unkind words. But in spite of my failings, I know that Jesus Christ offered and offers freely his hope, his kindness, and his forgiveness. He's the light of the world. I am invited to the table. We're invited.